Thank you, colleagues. We are trying to figure out a couple of minor technical issues to get to our first speaker and to check that we have the right line of communication. So Pradeep, as soon as you can confirm that we are reaching out to you, that would be great. In the meantime, I will take a little bit of time to introduce you to this side event. I don't know if it's actually a side event or a formal meeting of the Civil Society section. So I would just welcome everybody. This is a great honor for OHHR to be moderating this event, which is called Leave No One Offline, Digital Inequalities and Addressing Barriers to Full Participation and Inclusion Online. I would like to take this small space of time that we have to give you a few housekeeping notes. We're counting with international sign interpretation, which is available and pinned to the screen, so hopefully you have access to it already. This webinar is being recorded in order to share with all of you afterwards. We will use the chat box to provide you with resources such as panelist bios, reports. We are referencing to videos, etc. If you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box that it's being provided also in the Zoom platform, which can be found at the bottom of your screen. The panelists will do their best to answer to your questions now, and if we don't manage to get them all right away, you can also submit it and we'll try to come back to you later. So welcome on behalf of the organizers to this virtual civil society forum outbreak of Leave No One Offline. As you know, and we have all experienced the challenges of engaging on this digital age, particularly now in this pandemic situation, where we have also identified this huge gap that exists between the high-income countries and middle-income countries compared to other countries. So we would like today to present a little bit on these challenges and the gaps that exist between these two realities, right? The panel discussion is meant to highlight some of the initiatives that have been struggling to emerge in this situation and beyond, looking at how we can find solutions. So in situations where access to internet and to connectivity is not as effective, we can still provide for the necessary tools for people to thrive and to access to the information that they need. So our first panelist today will be Pradeep Sinha from Society of Empowerment of the Deafblind in India, also member of the World Federation of the Deafblind, speaking about the findings of a study the organization conducted earlier in the year on how restricted are deafblind people in India and linked to access to technology. Are we okay to get the intervention?
Okay, I'm ready now, so I'm going to start my presentation. Great. Uh, Good evening to all of you, all participants and panelists. This is the first time that the UNCRPD. So we are having this panelist from the UNCRPD group. So my name is Pradeep. This is my sign name. Okay. So I've got a lot of, I want to share my experiences with regard to this topic, with the topic that has been given to me. So this is about assistive devices. During this pandemic period, the deafblind people are not having it very easy. They're facing a lot of problems and issues. So it has become very hard to travel. So accessibility is a big issue. When I was working in the office, I use my braille devices at office, but during the pandemic, during this lockdown, where everything is shut, so deafblind people are stuck at home, and when some of our assistive devices and braille refreshable devices do not work, we are stuck, really stuck, and we are not able to send them for the repair shops to get it serviced because the postal services and the courier services are closed. So we had to wait and wait and wait for months. We have suffered a lot. And I personally have undergone great suffering. So how to resolve this issue? I would like to communicate with friends, visit them. For hearing and non-blind people, it is pretty easy for them to communicate, to check the text messages on WhatsApp, on the mobile phones. But for us, it is really a big problem, and we are feeling really bored. And even if the service centers are open, they do not deliver the products on time, and it takes around 3 months or 4 months to get it serviced. So I take the help of my family members, my nephew, and other children here. Whenever I get some kind of message, they help uh, interpret that for me. But they also have their own time, their schooling and their examinations. So I feel really stuck up here, and I really feel bored. I feel irritated and annoyed at times, and do not know how to resolve this. So this issue is faced by all deafblind in India. So we do not have any solution, any initiative to resolve this issue. And secondly, accessibility is a big issue here. Even if we get our refreshable braille devices serviced, and we get the devices back and we're able to communicate, there is limited communication even then. Because when we keep using our refreshable braille devices, maybe 10 or 15 days later, the devices get stuck up again, and then we have to get them serviced again. Again, wait for 2-3 months to get that resolved. So this is a big issue that we are facing. It's very hard for us. So even if I use the laptop to connect to the Braille devices, but when we get on Zoom, on webinars, on Zoom calls like this, so I still face a lot of accessibility issues because I'm not able to read the captions. The deaf people, probably they can see and read the caption on Zoom, but it's not getting, my Braille device is not getting with connected with the captions, and I'm not able to read the captions. So I would like my life as a deafblind person to be very independent and to have freedom and to have access and to be able to reach places. Other people are able to access and go to different places, but I'm not able to do that. And because of the pandemic, people aren't willing to communicate with us through tactile method. So if I want to go out and communicate with people, they're not very keen on touching me. Even if I wear gloves, the communication is very limited. So how do we resolve this issue? So the only way to communicate is through my phone, and it's still not easy, it's very difficult. And thirdly, I would like to suggest the government of India they have to provide full accessibility services for deafblind in terms of transportation, in terms of communication through braille devices and things like that, which are pretty easy for us to use. So even if we use the laptops and all that, so we even if there is speech or any kind of video messages, so these should be able to be read through the braille devices. So these kind of services the government has to provide using the reasonable accommodation, which is there in UNCRPD. Okay, so I'm free to, I'm open to suggestions from you all to see how we can resolve these issues. That's it from me, and I would welcome any ideas from all of you.
Thank you, Pradeep. Thank you very much for your intervention. And thank you for showing us the level of complexity to access to information that you've been facing, particularly in these last times. I will keep
During the pandemic situation, it's very difficult because we are stuck at home. It feels like we are prisoned here and we suffer each and every day and we need interpreters. So there's a lot of issues. Sometimes there is also another fourth point which I like to share. A week back, I asked for an interpreter to visit my house so that I can be a part of this webinar. But suddenly it so happened that interpreter's grandmother passed away. So the interpreter couldn't come and she had to cancel. So I got stuck. So I don't have an interpreter here. I searched for an interpreter very hard locally. I've texted so many of them to come and help me out. But I find it so difficult because everyone is busy with their own lives. And my parents do not know how to communicate with me. They just use a bit of voice. And my brother and my nephew, they all work outside. They have work outside also, and they have school and they have examinations. So I keep requesting them, and whenever they can help me out. And my nephew is here to help me out to open the link and to set up everything. So it's very hard for me if we don't have interpreters here. So I'm feeling very depressed about this. So all this has happened. So it's very difficult to find good people over here. So how we can resolve this in future? The government must be asked to have greater accessibility services and to provide information equally to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Hopefully I'm not interrupting again. So I would just like to give the floor now to Rosario Galarza from the Comisión de Damas Invidentes del Perú, CODI, also Human Rights Officer at RIADIS, at the Latin American Network of Persons with Disabilities and Their Families, presenting on the experience of RIADIS in co-hosting an online course on sexual and reproductive health and rights with UNFPA in Latin America. Rosario?
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me. Thanks, Facundo. Here I am very pleased to share with you the experience of the Latin American Network of Non-Governmental Organizations of Persons with Disabilities and Their Families, RIADIS, in co-hosting 2 different online courses, one for women with disabilities and another for young persons with disabilities, thanks to the sponsor of the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA. I would like to say first that these courses are called the Leadership and Empowerment of Women and Young Persons with Disabilities courses for Latin America and the Caribbean. And these are courses that were due to the requests of different persons with disabilities. When the pandemic started, RIADIS carried out different webinars with different topics. And from this webinar, many people made different requests to have training, especially in the human rights of instruments and also in other issues about advocacy and sexual health and reproductive rights. And that's why RIADIS started to design this project with 2 courses. And the courses started in November 9, and they're going to finish in December 22nd. Regarding the objective is to strengthen the capacities and the leadership of women and young persons with disabilities. The methodology is a methodology which is in a learning environment, in a virtual learning environment, in a platform provided by Universidad Politécnica Salesiana of Ecuador. Regarding the methodology of the courses, they have different online classes per week, 5 hours of classes per week. And additionally, they have other learning activities, such as, for instance, group activities, other things. The duration of the total course is approximately 1.5 months. And we have different accessibility features in order to ensure the participation of all the students with disability, and especially the ones coming from underrepresented groups. For instance, regarding the accessibility features, we have international sign language interpreters for each of the classes. We have also captioning, and we have all the materials, especially the study materials, because we developed some study guides for each module. They are in plain language and also in accessible digital formats. And we have the description in the images for blind and partially sighted. And we have also some materials provided in easy to read versions. And we have individual mentorship for the trainees, especially for the ones who have intellectual disabilities and others. We have also different exchange groups in WhatsApp and other platforms in order that students can share their experience and learning from others. It's very interesting that we have observed different challenges faced by students with disability, especially lack of connectivity in rural areas, and also lack of access to different assistive devices. For instance, sometimes in one family, there's just one cell phone, which is used for the study to do the training. We have also different conditions of the environment. Sometimes now that people, especially people are working and study from home, they don't have the same conditions of the environment to study. Sometimes there are some environments that are more noisier than others, and these kind of things. We need to let you know that we have 80 students registered in each of these courses, and the students come from different backgrounds and comes from different disability constituencies. For instance, we have blind and partially sighted people, also deaf people, deaf-blind people. We have persons with psychosocial disabilities, persons with intellectual disabilities, persons with autism, and including indigenous persons with disabilities. I think we need to maybe as a conclusion say that for RIADIS, it's very important to conduct these trainings in order to develop advocacy at the local, regional, and national level. And we have discovered that accessibility requirements are critical to ensure the full and effective participation of women and young persons with disability. However, we know that we still have different gaps, but we know that we are in the right way to try to solve these gaps and try to improve the quality of these courses. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
And you, Rosario, thank you very much for providing that that view and also to register the number of different options and challenges that are also connected to working in Latin America with scarce resources. Moses, you have the floor.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be participating in this very important webinar. First and foremost, I'm Moses Serada from Uganda, and I work with Uganda Federation for the Hard of Hearing. I'm hard of hearing, and I'm also a fellow for the International Federation of the Hard of Hearing and International Disability Alliance on a fellowship opportunity for empowering persons who are hard of hearing in employment on Article 27. To cut the long way short, I want to highlight the reasons why I'm here. First and foremost, I participated in a workshop organized by the Uganda Internet Governance Forum, which was hosted at the Ministry of Information and Communication Technology. The theme was collective youth participation, leveraging the internet as an engine for growth and development. Particularly, I discussed about the importance of integrating the needs of people with disabilities in the forum, paying greater attention on the diverse needs of people with disabilities. I argued the chapter to promote and ensure innovations are made disability accommodative. I also urged them to understand that disability is a cross-cutting issue, because even the United Nations Disability Inclusion Strategy reaffirms it. And I challenged them to interest themselves in understanding the United Nations Disability Inclusion Strategy, and also to understand the CRPD, because when they are developing technologies, it is very important that they always focus on those relevant facts that people with disabilities need for them to be empowered, and also be part of the digitization process. And a lot of emphasis was drawn on the fact that the emergence of COVID-19 increased the global reliance on internet during the pandemic. So now, from the social protection angle, it exposed the government's weakness or government's unpreparedness to implement Article 11 of the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, because the government was ill-prepared and many persons with disabilities have been more affected, despite the fact that we have the convention and it was also subscribed by the government. And most of the issues that have been critical to the persons with disabilities in general have been: first, poverty is a general factor limiting the access and affordability of ICT for persons with disabilities. This is practically because many of our fraternity cannot afford owning smartphones and maybe laptops. And there is also the fact that the few who can own them, they are in urban areas. And those ones who are in rural areas where the pandemic has even stricken harder, they cannot properly benefit, they cannot properly use the gadgets. And so that one, poverty has been highlighted. And secondly, the low level of ICT literacy among persons with disabilities. Now, this one has affected us so much. Many of our members have been limited to participate in webinars, conferences, and meetings because they don't know the technical know-how. So they cannot participate. They cannot represent their views. So this limitation wasn't the situation. And three, government policy and taxes. For example, in Uganda, there is an introduction of a tax which they call over the top, which they call OTT. This one is imposed on social media users, which is a huge hindrance on ICT users. For example, persons with disabilities who rely on internet to get information, they have to pay for data, and they also have to pay for data subscription. So that one is double payment. It limits participation, and as a result, denies persons with disabilities and others from effective participation in issues that affect them. So the third issue was unavailability of relevant softwares in local languages. For example, this one make it very hard for persons with disabilities to interact and maybe share views that can be supportive of their needs. Representing my constituency as a hard of hearing person, we experienced many challenges. First, COVID-19 has been a critical time when effective communication is key, the hard of hearing persons have been technically knocked out in regard to information accessibility. For example, the president has been addressing the nation, and the Ministry of Health has also been addressing the nation on important facts about COVID-19 guidelines and safety. So we always need to adhere, but the channel of communication has not always been friendly to our needs to access information. For example, captions have not been presented on televisions. Subtitles have not been anywhere. People who are hard of hearing have not benefited from information that has been always communicated in real time. Sign language has been provided at some point, but the narrative is media houses, you think that when they provide sign language interpreters on televisions, broadcasts, it is enough satisfaction to cover the requirements for all people who are having hearing problems. The fact is, many of us who are known to using sign language as our first language find a lot of problems trying to understand what they are trying to deliver without captions. And that myth has put us in a very critical state to the fact that it has increased our vulnerability to contract the virus because we could not comprehend the messages in real time. And I made a few recommendations, having realized that inclusive and meaningful access to internet is the key to stronger COVID recovery among persons with disabilities. I thought of that the government can support persons with disabilities to build their capacity in ICT and to reduce the already widened gap on the digital divide, where we feel that some members in the disability movement have been left behind. And so by bridging by empowering them to build their capacity in ICTs, it will be one way of narrowing that gap and bringing it closer again to enable us get on board. And two, maybe for giving tax waivers to internet users. This, for example, the OTT tax is uncalled for, and they would have given us a waiver maybe to enable us access information on a daily basis. And lastly, government needs to consistently work with organizations of persons with disabilities because it is important to capture real-time information or relevant information specific to disability categories. And then the government can support all the innovations that aim at promoting disability inclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Moses. I forgot to introduce Moses, so he's part of the Uganda Federation of the Hard of Hearing and a fellow to the International Federation of Hard of Hearing People. Thank you very much, that was very powerful. We'll move now to Axel Blois, who's the G3 ICT president, and he will make a presentation on research results and practical examples related to Leave No One Offline on the institutional advocacy during the lockdown, especially regarding accessibility of digital services. Axel, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And to start with, I would say that, as everyone else, it's very clear that if anything, COVID-19 has in fact accelerated the need and for accessibility of online services for persons with disabilities. In a way, the fact that everybody had to use online services makes it very clear that making those services, as we say, available, affordable, adequate, accessible to persons with disabilities is really essential. So I would say that those 4 A's are really important to consider as countries try to tackle those issues of equal access to online services. And then, if I may, I would like to rely a little bit on the result of the DARE Index 2020, which is the research program we have been running with many organizations for persons with disabilities around the world. This year, 137 countries contributed their data from their perspective and sharing where their country stands from a digital accessibility standpoint. And we measure commitment, capacity to implement, and then actual results of countries. And the first thing I would say is that to start with, the overall results of the least developed countries come to be about half of that of the high income countries. There is almost like a straight line between the availability and the actual performance of countries in digital accessibility and the level of economic development. I mean, it's something that's quite obvious to everyone, but this is like clearly measured by data from all those countries, and it's important to keep it in mind. Which is also very useful to know is that when you plot the performance of countries for digital accessibility, they are very much linked to the date of their CRPD ratification. That's a very, very interesting and promising fact. In other terms, countries which have signed and ratified the convention early on in 2007, 2008, 2009 have on average more than double the performance of countries which did sign and ratify the convention over the past 2 or 3 years. So it shows that the framework that the CRPD brought to state parties for digital accessibility does have a very powerful impact. Now, the question is, are countries actually following those CRPD articles and implementing the policies that are necessary to implement the CRPD dispositions? And that's where we see both some encouraging signs and some really critical gaps. But first of all, it's important to consider in any country whether the local establishment, the local culture, the local legislation recognize the importance of ICT accessibility. The good news here is that about 61% of countries now have a legal definition of accessibility that incorporate ICTs as per Article 9 of the Convention. Just to give you an idea, this percentage was 51% 2 years ago. And I can tell you from history, in the beginning, almost no country had such definition in place. And that's very important because you cannot deploy policies and programs if you don't have the legal foundation to do so. Similarly, we see international digital accessibility standards being referenced in more countries now than before. About 44% of countries are adopting ICT accessibility standards that are mainstream. But that still means that 56% of countries do not, which is a huge gap. So I would say among the key results that we need to keep in mind, that governments have to make sure that ICT accessibility standards are actually referenced and implemented in the country. And so more specifically to our topic today of online access, 58% of countries have web accessibility policies, but those are mostly geared towards government, services and education, and in rare occasions to the private sector. So we see online accessibility of websites to be really focusing on public services and less so on the private sector. And that, of course, has a consequence in that some essential services are actually manned by the private sector. And then furthermore, when you look at the level of implementation of those policies, they tend to be very weak. So it's good news that all those policies are being implemented, but we need to recognize that a lot of distance needs to be covered before we get to a good situation. And the same situation applies to policies to promote the availability and usage of the internet by persons with disabilities, which, by the way, is part of the CRPD, Article 9. Very, very few countries have actually have such policies fully implemented, but about 49% of countries around the world today have such policies in place and starting some efforts. Promoting assistive technologies, which is a key issue for persons with disabilities that cannot use accessible features of mainstream services and need devices and software to access the information. And there are 3 sectors where we see initiatives that are more specifically towards vertical markets, such as e-government and smart cities, inclusive ICTs in education, or employment. There are quite a few countries, about half of countries have some kind of programs going on. But again, the level of implementation, when you look at the reality that, for instance, policies to promote internet availability and usage among persons with disabilities, while 51% of countries have such policies, only 21% of countries have any kind of partial or substantial level of implementation. So it's still a very small impact, considering the scope of the challenge for persons with disability.
Thanks, Julia. I had to strike.
What I would like to emphasize is some of the learning points from the comments and the feedback we get through that survey process. First of all, it looks like in most countries where we see success, the participation of multiple stakeholders is really critical to success. So for instance, without the private sector, in many cases, you can't really achieve much. I will give you an example. For instance, we know that a vast majority of people now, especially in developing nations, are actually using access to the internet or using mobile phones or mobile tablets. That means that mobile service providers are a key component of any solution to provide services that are accessible and available and affordable to persons with disabilities. So we see some countries where we have some great examples of private sectors taking the lead in that space. So for instance, from developed nations like AT&T in the US or Orange in Europe or Turkcell in Turkey, a remarkable example, or NTT Docomo in Japan, they were like the pioneers of creating new services for persons with disabilities. That can be easily done. It works. Solution exists. There is no reason why they are not offered everywhere. And so I would really encourage all advocates around the world to push their government and their telecom regulators to ensure that they engage the mobile service providers in implementing services for persons with disabilities. And I know many of them already do, from Safaricom to companies in many different countries. So I would say it's a major opportunity, low-hanging fruit for governments to satisfy the needs of persons with disabilities. The other thing I would like to say is that it seems like a holistic approach to the issue of online access is necessary. Governments should be considering different aspects to the issues that we are discussing today. There are solutions such as subsidies for persons with disabilities to acquire broadband or mobile services. That can be done through both public or private sector offerings. There is level of direct assistance to offer technology and services to target populations such as deafblind persons, which we heard a great case today. There are different countries which have specific programs to distribute equipment and services for deafblind persons. There are also a number of digital literacy programs to help persons with disabilities adopt technologies and use assistive technologies. Those are super important. And then I would say quite often we see programs geared towards low income to be actually also covering persons with disabilities, since quite often persons with disabilities are in the low income bracket. So we say that from a solution standpoint, one particular policy I would like to emphasize is we have currently about 39% of countries using their, it's called the Universal Service Fund of the Telecom Universal Service Fund. And that's really important because the potential of those funds is considerable, and in many countries now you see those funds utilized to serve persons with disabilities and ensure they have access to online services and technology. It's a real good lever because unlike annual budget from governments, that comes from a tax on bills for telecom users. And so it's recurring. It's never at risk of being cut. It's the Universal Service Fund has that beautiful aspect of it, which is the certainty of the income stream for the future. The education sector is also a very big piece in that whole equation of bringing online to persons with disabilities, because young population clearly have a greater propensity to adopt those new solutions than older persons. And so education is a natural vehicle to change how things are being done in many places. But I want to conclude by underlining two absolutely critical facts that have been already talked about today. One is the lack of skills to implement accessible digital services is considerable. 38% of countries only have any kind of courses available about digital accessibility in any way, shape, or form. And that is a huge block to progress. That's one of our goals at Digital ICT with our IAP division, the International Association of ICT Professionals, to provide training and certification on digital accessibility. And we hope that many more countries can participate in those programs. But the last but not the least, the most critical issue I see all over the world, and I want to really conclude on that particular point, is that unfortunately, very few countries, in fact, 26% of countries, have any kind of statutory process to involve persons with disabilities in the definition, implementation, and monitoring of digital accessibility policies and programs. And we know from both statistical and anecdotal evidence that if a government does not have processes to involve persons with disabilities in that policy domain, the results are likely to be not good. And so we really want to send that message that the best way to make progress is to ensure that, number one, you have multiple stakeholders involved in all those policies and programs, but most importantly, that persons with disabilities are always driving the process from the user perspective and helping define what's needed and how it should be done and promoted, and what is actually the best way to make things happen. So with that, I want to thank you for your attention, and I hope that we can see more over the next few years happen.
Thank you, Axel. Thank you very much. We are coming really to the end of the session. I want to check with you, colleagues in IDA, if you want to take the floor for a couple of minutes, or if you would rather move to questions and answers. Claudia, if you can guide me on that, that would be great.
Thank you, Facundo. We don't have questions and answers. If Paula and Amba could share very quickly about two key tools that we have, okay? We cannot hear you, Paula.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'll just hold it up. Great. So very quickly, earlier, if you were part of the plenary session, you may have heard that the IDA Global Survey on OPD participation in development policies and programs was launched. So we have learned a lot from this global survey. And one of the key pieces has been around accessibility issues and persons with disabilities not being able to participate. So IDA is now looking at ways to address these lessons and issues for the launch of the next global survey in 2021. We wanted to ensure we consulted with IDA members to discuss what accessible and inclusive data collection looks like and how we can create a survey that is fully accessible and fully inclusive. So we wanted to equip ourselves especially with a tool or a platform that would be able to launch surveys in exclusive and in accessible manners. So now we're working with a service provider to build and develop a survey platform that will be as fully inclusive and accessible as possible for the greatest number of persons with disabilities. And this platform is called iData. It has not been officially launched yet, but I'd like to share a little bit about it with you. So we wanted to ensure that the platform was not only meeting basic accessibility standards, but going beyond and ensuring that we have functions that are fully accessible within a data collection methodology. We wanted to have features that would meet the needs of different constituencies. And this is where we listen to our IDA members and consultations, understanding what would work best. So we built things in such as tooltips or hover boxes where we can have further definitions or information. We wanted to ensure there was ease of access between survey sections. so it's easy to navigate. We wanted flexibility in communication methods, so different formats, so we could have video, images, text-to-speech options, so that any constituency can use this platform for surveys, to build surveys and to answer surveys, whatever method works best. We also want to consider participation where internet is limited, and what that means in terms of answering a survey online, from saving answers and ensuring that people can reconnect in the spot they left off. So quickly, we're currently in the testing phase of this survey platform. We're working with a diverse group of persons with disabilities from different constituencies across the world, from the global south and global north, to ensure that we have a diverse feedback so that we can use that and make changes within the platform. Once we've finalized our testing, we're planning to use the iData tool to launch the COVID survey that IDA is launching in December. And then, of course, to use it for the next version of the IDA Global Survey that will be launched in early next year. So that's just really quickly and briefly how we're working on making data collection and surveys more accessible and inclusive for the most amount of people with disabilities. Thanks.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you very much. We'll pass to Amba Salkar also from the International Disability Alliance to share on the development of the online course platform.
Hi, I'm going to be super quick. We have at IDA, we are in the process of developing an online course platform which will build on the experience that IDA has in building capacity building that's by, for, and with persons with disabilities. It doesn't want to replace online trainings. We love Bridge. We love all of our in-person trainings, which have extreme value. But this is something which will also exist along with that. Our process for procurement of an online learning platform took 5 months. We developed a list of 32 criteria, which not only looked at accessibility and compliance with standards like WCAG 2.1, but also looked at other considerations like the internet, like our other speakers spoke about, like limited bandwidth issues, and put all of those, looking at customizations as well. Unfortunately, we found that despite current standards, many learning management systems responded saying that they were either not in compliance, or after speaking to them, we realized that they were not in compliance. So the lack of engagement from private actors, we fear, is actually increasing the digital design divide among persons with disabilities and the general population. One thing that we have been doing at IDA is that our members have been heavily involved in this process, in looking at shortlisted platforms, developing the criteria, testing them, both from perspectives as learners as well as facilitators, because that's the roles that we all want to play. But the diversity of responses from this testing process showed us that even beyond accessibility, the overall experience depends a lot on the ability to customize the design and make it as user-friendly as possible. We're in the process of now developing courses and empaneling many experts, which will help us ensure that these courses reflect the diversity of persons with disabilities and their requirements. So, I guess watch this space for more. And we really hope that many of you would find this platform super useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Amba. And definitely, we will knock on your door very, very quickly after you have that. Thank you very much. Thank you, colleagues. I think there are a number of outcomes that definitely we can learn from this. First of all, the number of good improvements, the challenges that we are all facing, the different levels, right, of challenges that are ahead. Some that may go pretty much to the very nitty-gritty of deciding on a learning platform, to the maximum macroeconomics that may be, tickling through this difficult path that it's going out of this COVID situation into a recovery phase where we can definitely start looking at the opportunities that were also created by this pandemic. I take a couple of words from Axel that are related to the inequalities challenge that I think it would be very important to start addressing as a systemic human rights issue when it comes to persons with disabilities in particular, and to look at the many examples that Pradeep and Moses presented, that Rosario also shared, that are connected to finding creative solutions in difficult times, but at the same time to be strong and to stay firm when it comes to demand from governments their obligations under the convention. But hopefully, Axel, we will make it more clear in a way that we can definitely transmit those messages, also using the call from the Sustainable Development Goals. So thank you, colleagues. Thank you very much for everything. Let's keep in touch. Let's keep abreast. And thank you to interpreters for the support as always.
Many
Bye,
thanks,
colleagues.
Facundo. Bye-bye, everyone.
Hi.